Happy birthday, Shannon. Make sure you have a good one. This one's for you. I hear the other guy on my beat get dispatched to a well-being check of an elderly lady. After a few minutes, the guy asks for a supervisor. A few minutes later, they dispatch me to the lady's house. I get there, and the supervisor asks me to climb through an unsecured window at the back of the house because I'm of a smaller stature. I get to the window and tell it's to the bedroom. I can hear a loud television on in another room. I can also tell it's Fox News. I yell out, "Police, does anyone need help?" As I climb through the window. I hear an old raspy voice call, "Here." I run out of the bedroom, down the hall to where I heard the voice called from. From the living room, I see a lady lying face down in the dining room area. I call out to her, "Ma'am, did you fall? Where are you hurt?" I run to her, and she's not moving. I touch her hand, and it's ice cold. She's dead. Been so for days. I unlock the door and let the supervisor and other officer in. I tell them I heard a voice, and we need to check the whole house. No one else was in there. I know the TV was on, but I could tell it was the news, and heard a voice over it. Who the hell did I hear? I was cleaning out a drug take-back box by my office one time. It's a metal box where people throw their old prescriptions so we can dispose of them properly. Usually, people throw all manner of mundane items, sunscreen, vitamins, etc. But you run into a few opioids. On this evening, I reached into the box and felt a prick on my finger and saw an uncapped syringe. This was definitely not a sharps box. The sign on it warns against putting them in there, but that doesn't stop people. I had unlocked the container and had a large garbage bag full of the contents on the floor. I still should have looked more carefully where I was reaching. My heart dropped, and I went to the bathroom and started squeezing blood out of the pinprick. With shaky hands, I called my dispatch and asked them to send a paramedic to the office. The medic came and consulted with the on-call doctor before she told me the chance of contracting something was very slim. I took a closer look at the syringe and saw it was someone's testosterone supplement, and it had the patient's name as well as the hospital name. I called down to the hospital, and thankfully, the guy had no communicable diseases. Sure freaked me out though. About a month ago, I was riding out with one of the officers I always go out with, and we were driving down a main street when I see a guy standing in a bus stop holding a hatchet. So I tell my officer, and we flip around. Our beat partner also flips around. When we go to make a stop on the guy, he starts running from us, so our beat partner cuts him off with his car, and both officers get out to chase him on foot. The guy tripped on a driveway and dropped the hatchet. When he goes to get back up, our partner goes to shove him back down and starts to grapple with him. At that moment, my officer and I realized the suspect pulled a pocket knife out and was about to stab our partner. My officer quickly kneed the guy's arm with the knife down and pulls his gun out at the guy. I was expecting to see a guy get shot point blank that night, but luckily, After a few seconds, he let go of the knife, and we were able to get him in cuffs. Now, sometime during the fight, the guy craps himself. Could have been while getting elbow blows, or when he realized he had a Glock 21 in his face. Jesus, it smelt so bad. Funny part was, while at the hospital, getting cleared, since we had to use force, my officer was interviewing the suspect, and he said he was getting chased by two guys who looked just like my officer and our partner, until police showed up and saved him. Guy was obviously crazy and didn't remember much. My buddy, who I was riding out with, said that was the second closest time he had been in 5 years to shooting someone. Glad things didn't go that way. My father-in-law was a police officer in a smallish town in New Zealand. One Christmas Eve, he's on duty, and I was at home with my new wife. He's supposed to be home at about 11, but getting on 1 AM, he's still not home. Knowing he sometimes enjoyed a beer or two after duty, I offered to drive down to the local to see if he was there. Anyway, I get dressed, go outside, and I'm just about to get in the car when I see him staggering up the drive. I walk down to meet him, and from about 5 meters, I smell crap. Not normal crap, but something deeper, stronger. Turns out he's covered head to toe in liquid cow dung, soaked to the skin, dripping. So the story went, he was on duty and got called to a local mall where the Santa had been accused of shoplifting. Sure enough, they got there, and Santa had bags of lollies and drinks down his pants. So they handcuff him and take him away in front of all the kids. They gave him a warning at the station and sent him on his way. Not long after, there was a call to a serious car accident. He and his partner were first on the scene. A young woman who was very pregnant had sadly died on impact. He ends his shift and is riding home on his motorbike and starts thinking about having to arrest Santa on Christmas Eve, and gets to laughing, which gets to him not concentrating on riding, and he misses a corner and goes through a fence into a paddock. The bike is a write-off, but he's okay, and so is the bottle of brandy he was bringing home for Christmas Day. It was only a few kilometers from home, so he thinks, screw it, I'll walk. After walking for a bit, he gets to thinking about that young woman. He gets thirsty, so off comes the top of the brandy bottle. He drinks the whole bottle as he's walking home, and as he gets to the top of a small rise, he realized that he needs a wee. So he steps off the road, walks up to the edge of a small bluff, whips it out and wheezes into the void. As he's putting it away, he stumbles forwards, trips, and falls over the bluff. Luckily, an effluent pond broke his fall. A year ago, my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night, claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets this about 2 to 3 times per week. Every night, they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calm her down. One night, when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to, quote, record their tracks. And my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny, like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. A few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too, and want to see it. 10 police officers, all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out, a possum had babies, and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth and food. The prints look so foreign because most of the time, baby possums are carried by their mother and not running around. She definitely had some mental health issues, but unless you're endangering yourself or those around you, there's not much a cop can do. I mean, they did all feel pretty bad for outright dismissing her though. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. I'm in the UK and got a call to say a guy had been arrested in the early hours for going equipped for theft. In the UK, it can be an offence if you have items for, quote, going equipped, such as rubber gloves, foil-lined bags, jemmy tools, crowbars, screwdrivers, etc., when you have no lawful excuse. The excuse could be that you work with those items, or that you need them for a job you've just done, or are going to do. It can be simple, but if someone has a torch, lockpicking kit, and some rubber gloves at 3 AM near some storage containers, then they don't need to have committed a crime, such as theft or burglary, to be arrested. Anyway, this guy's mother had been into the station to ask about the kids. What kids? He didn't mention kids. I go to the house and shout through the letterbox. No reply. Shout again, and there's a 3-year-old kid that comes to the door. He doesn't have a key, and I ask if he's alone. No, his 18-month-old brother is in there with him. 3 and 18-month-old kids, alone in a house, virtually all night. We use the big red magic key to break the door down and get inside. Oh my God. I'm still haunted by the squalor these kids lived in. Dirty nappies everywhere, takeaway cartons, dirty clothes just everywhere. The 18-month-old has filled his nappy that much it's coming up his back. We get grandmother to come and collect them. As we do, I'm looking for a cup to get them a drink and bread for toast, as they've not eaten. No cups without mold growing, and nothing except tinned beans. I couldn't even get them a drink of water without risking their health, so we got a bottle of water from a nearby shop. We got the kids away and do a sweep of the house. Those poor kids, they shared a single bed. The bathroom hadn't been cleaned in years. Go to Dad's room, cannabis grow set up in a small tent. This could have set on fire at any point and those kids would have perished. We get all that cleared up and bagged up as evidence. I go through the house, switching off electrical appliances, and get to his computer, which is running. I move the mouse to shut down, and his desktop picture is of a young girl naked. He got a lengthy bail date, lost the kids, and lost his house. Lives with his grandmother. Too good for him, really. The grandmother was a social worker. She had no idea her son lived like that, and cried when she saw the house. He would always insist on meeting her elsewhere when she saw the kids. I've never been so disgusted and angry at one man, and the way he could live like that, let alone make his kids live in that environment. I did a stint as a fire department dispatcher for a couple of years. It was a really small department, a rural community, on a highway intersection, so we didn't get much action. I worked the overnight shift, but apparently, sometime in the afternoon one day, a man in a pickup truck had rear-ended a woman in a convertible on the highway, both going high speeds. I never figured out how or why that happened exactly. He must have been drunk, I guess, but I never found out. The important part, however, is that when he hit her, Her car was forced into the next lane. It was a one-lane road, 65 mile an hour limit in either direction. Her little convertible sports car hit a semi-trailer head-on at a combined 130 miles an hour. She passed under every axle and impacted a second semi-trailer directly behind the first. The first semi ran off the road from the impact, but the driver was largely unharmed, just some bruises and scrapes. The second semi pulled over with relatively minor damage to the front of the truck. The woman and her convertible were both completely flattened. Our department wasn't allowed to leave the scene until the coroner showed up, and he's notoriously slow. It's a 3-hour drive to our end of the county, and he hates making the trip. It took him 10 hours to show up. The call lasted over 14 hours total. 14 hours of our guys on scene next to a woman who's unquestionably dead, and a man who needs a couple of ibuprofen and a tow truck. I closed out the call log in the early hours of the morning the day after the incident. I'm really glad I wasn't there on site, but all the firemen and EMTs who returned from that call were absolute zombies. Nobody said a word until the next day. It was pretty brutal for a department whose average call is an elderly full assist. I've had a few moments in policing, but this is the first one that comes to mind. We had just started our day, so we were standing in front of the station house chatting while loading up the cars and whatnot. I'm enjoying my post-roll call cigarette when I hear one of the new jacks come over the air. "Shots fired, 167 and 3rd, she stated calmly. So calm, we all took a moment. Maybe she had heard fireworks or shots in the distance, and being new, put it over right away before investigating. 167 and 3rd. 167 and 3rd, shots fired. She comes over again. This time, you can tell she's moving. You know it's legit. We dive into our cars and peel out. I see an unmarked car pull over on 167 and pick up the female officer who was putting it over. They start going eastbound. I follow a few lengths behind them, since they know who we're looking for. "Crime Sergeant, I've got the post who put it over. We're looking for an older male, black, bald head, black hoodie, fled east on 167. No sooner did those words leave his lips, than I look over to my right and see a guy fitting the description to a T. The unmarked sees him too, and pulls over fast. The guys jump out of the car in front of me and race towards him. The male sees them coming and jets out into the street. I'm a little further back, so I gun it and try to cut the guy off with my car without running him or the other cops over. As I'm getting closer, he grabs at his waistband in a frenzy. Just as he's pulling his gun, my front tire hits a sewer grate on the curb and blows. It sounds like a gunshot. The guy gets spooked and tosses the gun in the air. He pauses to try and catch the gun. The man's juggling a .357 in the middle of the street. It's huge, a Rick Grimes-sized hand cannon. Butterfingers misses the catch, and it bounces on the ground. For a split second, he thinks about going for it, but glances over his shoulder at the rather large officer about to tackle him and decides against it. My partner and I jump out of our car. I recover the mini howitzer he dropped. My partner and two of the cops from the unmarked tackle Butterfingers, about half a block down from where he tries to pull it on us. The rookie got a medal for it, which was nice for her. My partner and I got a "thanks boys" and had to change the tire we popped. Still, made for a good time. This happened to my father and his partner in the late 70s. At one of our larger intersections, There was an apartment building that curved, so it ran halfway down one street and part of the way down another. They received a call for a well-being check. Each floor was quite extensive, and most tenants watched over each other. A young man had called about an elderly man who lived at the end of the hall. His mailbox in the lobby was full. His Doberman wasn't barking, and the apartment, the very last one, was starting to smell. My dad and his partner thought of foul play, the dog being dead, the man being dead. Well, the old man had died. After the scene had been secured, the medical examiner wrote that the man had died of blunt force trauma to the head after he had fallen from the kitchen into the bathroom and cracked his skull on the toilet. He had been in undershorts, a sleeveless t-shirt, and a robe. A newspaper on the table was a week old. The Doberman was alive and well, wagging his tail. He had drank all of the water from the toilet and jumped up to scrape things off the counter to eat. Finally, he had eaten the old man. That's the way my dad always recounts the story. They had essentially found a skeleton licked clean. His partner went to street level and bought some hamburger meat. The Doberman ate it up and ended up being taken home by my dad's partner as a birthday gift to his son. The only odd thing was that a thigh bone was missing from the skeleton. A bit confusing, my dad found it hidden under a pillow on the couch. When I was a rookie, about 2 to 3 years on the job, I got a call for a vehicle fire at a gas station. I get there and see an older station wagon sitting right next to the pump, fully engulfed. Now, I've seen enough action movies to know that the entire gas station is just moments away from exploding in a huge fireball. Some guy yells, "Get your fire extinguisher." I look at the car and see 3 empty extinguishers lying around. I'm not sure what this guy thought extinguisher number 4 was going to do, that numbers 1 to 3 didn't, but I quickly ruled that out as a possibility. Another helpful soul yelled, "Push it out of the way with your car." In retrospect, this may not have been the worst idea, but I ruled that one out too. I knew that I only had seconds before the inevitable explosion would level the whole block. I ran over and hit the emergency shutoff, grabbed the clerk, and started sprinting across the street, just hoping I could get far enough away that the fireball wouldn't kill me. We get across the street and turn around just in time to see the fire department show up and casually start to extinguish the fire. They saw me sprint away and made fun of me for a while. Turns out, gas stations don't explode in real life the way they do in movies. I've only been a police officer for 2 years now. I wouldn't say I'm a firm believer in ghosts, but I have no explanation for what happened on this night. This wasn't a call I was responding to, but I was just driving around and observed a vehicle parked alone in the middle of a church parking lot. This was at night, so I figured maybe some kids were doing whatever kids do, right? So I pull up on the car from the side and see that no one is inside the vehicle. I then position my car behind it so I can run the plate. Maybe someone stole it and dumped it in the parking lot. So I start to run the plate, and I look at the car through the back window. And I kid you not, there was a person in the front seat looking at me through the rear view mirror. This is something you notice as a cop, because when you do traffic stops, you can tell how intently someone is really watching you inside your car, and possibly if they're going to try something. So I get a "oh crap" moment of I didn't see there were people inside the car, and drive up directly next to it to reassure what I saw. And there was no one inside the car. Chills immediately run down my back, and I noped the hell out of there. The car was later gone. Don't know what happened. Don't exactly know what I saw, but I was pretty freaked out. My partners and I used to sit at that church on quiet nights, because it's tucked away and you can just relax. I've not sat there since. I'm a police officer, and my scariest moment wasn't a fight, a collision, or anything like that. 3 a.m, I got called to a suicidal female in her low-income apartment. My partner and I find the unit, and I knock on the door. It creaks slowly open, showing pitch black from the inside. I identify myself. "Ma'am, it's the police. We're coming in." No response, but I can see the shadows bouncing from a candle-lit bedroom towards the back. I step in the doorway and see the woman sitting on the edge of her bed. She has a regular-sized torso, but her arms and legs are really tiny, like a baby's. She's wearing filthy stained pajamas, and her tiny legs are kicking rapidly. She's whispering and shaking her head back and forth. I notice a few candles on the bedside table, which is stacked full of Virgin Mary figurines. The walls are covered with rough sketches of crosses, upside down ones. "Ma'am, this is the police." That's when I notice the noose hanging from the closet, swaying slightly. Her wrinkled face snaps towards me. "You can't help me. The devil has me." I called my partner over. He took one look in the room and said, "Screw this," and went to let the paramedics in. The lady is still staring at me. Her head is tilting back and forth, kind of like when you confuse a dog, but less hilarious and more terrifying. I say, "Ma'am, we're here to help you. The paramedics are on their way up." She whispers, "Do you believe in God?" The apartment is deathly quiet when I whisper back, "No, ma'am." She nods and says, "That's good. Were you going to hurt yourself tonight, ma'am?" "I've been dead for years. Thought I was going to end the pain." She slides off the bed and onto the floor. She kind of does a push-up type pose on her small limbs, still staring into my soul. The bed is covered in reddish-brown stains, one covering another, covering another. She bats something that's under the bed towards her and pulls out a small glass bottle. It says holy water on the side. She flips the top up, rolls onto her back, and starts splashing this liquid all over her, and she goes back to kicking her feet frantically. "Save me! Save me!" She's shouting at the top of her lungs. The paramedics come into the room, and I'm slowly backing out, resting my hand on the back of my gun. "Save me! Save me!" again and again. The medics try and lift her to put her on the gurney. She lashes out, scratching the arms of the medics, drawing blood. They have to wrap her in a sheet and secure her with the seatbelt straps on the bed. The paramedic told me later that she screamed the whole way to the mental health wing in the hospital. I was the last one to leave the apartment. I blew out the candles and made sure the stove was off. I had one foot out of the door. I quickly ran back to her room, grabbed a little bottle, splashed some holy water onto my hatch gloves, and got the hell out of there. Yeah, I wasn't worried about falling asleep for the rest of that night shift. My craziest call was when we were called out to a woman driving down the road with, quote, "a man on my roof punching the roof in." Rubbish, we thought, but attended. Well, she was right. a half-naked dude on the roof of her car, punching in the roof as she drove round and round the roundabout. It was a skinny fella, 5'10", with a shaved head and tatty jeans. But his face, sweet Jesus, his face, like the offspring of the girl from The Exorcist and Gollum. He falls off and comes running at us, full on possessed and screaming. Honestly, at this point, he isn't even registering in my brain as a human. It was like something from a bad zombie film. I drew my CS spray, UK cops don't get guns, and leveled at him, just as another cop car comes flying in from stage right and knocks the guy over. We all just dive on this guy, who is unusually strong. He's throwing arms and punches like a bad Energizer bunny. We finally got him cuffed, and he was just tweaking and sweating and spitting for hours after. Turns out, he had been released from prison 2 hours previously, with around £80 to get himself on his feet. As is usual, he went straight to his dealer, bought as much methamphetamine as he possibly could, and just went crazy. Don't do drugs, kids. When I was working in an emergency response team, I was fairly unflappable, mainly due to inexperience. I had also previously worked on an emergency surgery ward, so injuries and gore were never a problem. It was a dark and stormy night, and we got called to a disturbance in a flat in an old building. The ambulance service had also been called, although none of us could work out why. We made our way to the flat, and calls are always on the top floor of a building with no elevators, it's a rule. And we got no response to knocking on the door, but could hear a baby crying inside, which abruptly stopped. We decided to slip the lock and stepped in. It was pitch black inside, and when I tried to turn my torch on, I realized it was out of batteries. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, accompanied by a suitably dramatic roll of thunder. The flash of light illuminated a silhouette standing in front of a large window. The figure was tall, skinny, naked, and holding a huge knife in his right hand. He was covered in blood, which was also dripping off the blade. The brief flash looked something like straight out of a horror film, and the 2 paramedics, my partner and I, let out our own variations of friggin' hell as the room was plunged back into darkness. One of the paramedics quickly found a light switch, and we could see that the guy was indeed covered in blood, his own from cuts all over his body. He stood passively as I took the knife off of him and sat down so one of the paramedics could start looking him over. My partner and the other paramedic started looking for the baby, but couldn't find it at all. Even looking in the fridge, oven and so on. We started to think maybe the guy had thrown it out the window or something as sinister, when the paramedic asked him for the umpteenth time where the baby was. The guy looked blankly, picked up a remote control, and turned on the TV. He had been watching old home movies with a baby screaming on it. Much relief was felt as he was carted off to hospital. About 10 years ago, I worked as an undercover narc. I set up a deal with a meth cook to make me a batch of speed. I was going to supply the ephedrine, and he was going to make a pound and take a cut for his services. My team procures a few cases of ephedrine pills, and my partner and I go in to make the deal. We had about 15 cops in the area as the arrest team. My partner and I are wired up and go into his house. He lives in a detached garage in the back of the house, which is set back about 50 yards from the street. The place is tiny and barely fits a queen-size bed and a dresser. My partner and I go in with the ephedrine and start talking with the guy, who is alone at this point. We're trying to get info where his lab equipment is. A few minutes later, there's a knock at the door, and the suspect opens it and breaks out a speed pipe and starts smoking. We're talking about girls, and the parolee says something, and my partner says, "Copy that," which is cop slang for "I hear you." I glare at him, and the parolee sort of gets quiet and stares at my partner. Then he passes the speed pipe to my partner and says, "You're up." My partner says, "Nah bro, I'm code 4. More cop slang for "I'm okay." The parolee says, "What the hell did you just say?" I realize our cover is blown and pull my gun out and yell "police" and give the signal over the wire that it just went sideways. The parolee jumps in between the bed and the wall, and he's reaching in his pocket. The cook runs out of the garage. I circle around the bed to engage the parolee, while my partner gives chase on the other guy. The parolee crawls under the bed, and I'm yelling at him to show me his hands, or I'm going to shoot him. I'm about ready to shoot into the bed, just as I see a bag of speed come flying out from under the bed, and his hands pop out too. The arrest team comes in, and we take the parolee into custody. He has a loaded gun in his pocket, but said he couldn't get to it because he was on his stomach as he crawled under the bed. We caught the other guy a few minutes later. As for my partner, I remember being pretty pissed afterwards. He apologized and said he screwed up. No excuses. We were and are best friends. We joke about it to this day. You can make jokes about the stupid stuff you do, if everyone is okay afterwards. I responded to a single vehicle crash where the guy was in the middle of the street. When I get there, still thinking this guy was needing help, he starts yelling gibberish and grabs his 2 kids, 1 and 3. He then starts yelling at me and reaching into his car like he's going for a weapon. I drew and sighted up on him, and he intentionally moved his kids into my line of fire. I couldn't just holster because he was reaching into the center console like he had a handgun. I couldn't shoot or use taser because the kids were right there. I had a split second to process the information and make a decision. I decided to sight onto his pelvic girdle, which is not a horrible shot placement. When my backup got there a few seconds later, I decided the kid's safety had priority over the unknown weapon, so I rushed him in the car. Short struggle and got both girls, who were thankfully completely unharmed. He did have a weapon in the car, and I'm pretty sure he was looking for it to be in the center console he was reaching in. Thankfully, it was elsewhere. It was so intense because I had such a short time to figure out what to do. I'm glad I made a good decision, and the girls and I went home safe. PCP is a hell of a drug. My first night out of the academy after graduation was a Friday, and I was scheduled to have the night off, returning for work on Monday. Of course, a friend of mine who had gone through the previous academy called me and said, "Hey, come ride with me." He had cleared it with his sergeant to let me ride, and off we went. Of course, I wouldn't get paid, but it was still worth it because I had just graduated. The whole night was dull, just checking buildings and a couple of traffic stops and driving the rural roads of Georgia. At about 2 a.m, I was ready to call it quits, and he turned around and headed back to town to drop me off. On the way, we saw a broken down Buick Sentry, with a male and female outside of it looking lost. We stopped and checked on them, found out they had run out of gas within eyesight of a gas station. Since the Century was on top of the interstate overpass, there was a slight hill leading down to the gas station. We decided that we would push the car to the edge of the hill, and then they would stop and jump in. We would then give them one good last push, where hopefully they would just coast into the gas station. Since the Buick had a cheap hollow plastic bumper, my partner decided that we couldn't use the patrol car's push bumper to actually push the car, as it might break or crack the cheap bumper. So he volunteered me to push, while he followed in the patrol car, running blue lights so no one would run smack into us. Everything was going fine, the three of us pushing to the edge with little problem. Me in the back, while the male pushed from the driver's side door, and the female on the passenger side. When we reached the edge of the hill, I called for him to stop and get in. Instead of getting in, he started running, pushing harder and faster. Then suddenly, as the car began to get up to a good speed, he hops in. The female, being larger and much heavier, attempts the same, but slips. I'm so stunned watching her hold on for dear life, one hand on the passenger door and the other on the roof of the car. She's being dragged down the road, and I'm just so out of it that I was still pushing. Once I came to, I stopped yelling for him to stop. I have no idea to this day how he couldn't see her next to him, barely holding on. He never attempts to stop the car, he just lets it roll. Right as the car is almost at the bottom of the hill, it's going about 40 to 50 miles an hour. Right as I think she can hold on to the gas station, she just looks up into the car, gives up, and lets go. The back tire catches both of her legs, right at the knees. I could hear the crack. I literally put my hands over my ears at the sound. We call an ambulance, and our sergeant shows up. He speaks to the driver, and then my partner, and I'm sweating bullets. I knew it was over. I had spent almost 2 years in the jail in order to earn the right to go to the academy, and it's over all in 1 second. Worst of all, I wasn't getting paid. The sergeant walks over, and I'm just about ready to take my duty belt off, hand it to him, and just go home. He just laughed, patted me on the shoulder, then said it wasn't my fault, the male driver should have stopped. I have been to worse calls since then, but nothing beats that. I was so scared that everything I had just worked for was over because I had just pushed a car on top of a woman. I laugh about it now, but at the moment, all I could think about was how I was going to be sued and unemployed. I was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thought was just to tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically, nothing seemed wrong. As I'm pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now, spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think that the girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before, so I think crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Not talking, but she's looking up at the sky. It's a nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her, now bright red face and watering eyes, and realize she's trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me. So now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. The ambulance arrives and we get to hospital, and now she's forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure that she's a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair, she strikes up her "I'm a little teapot" pose and keeps this up for the next hour. Zero movement, just frozen with her arms out. So now I have 3 potential situations. 1, she's pretending to be frozen in time. 2, she's suffering from a mental health issue. 3, she has been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. I've dealt with people who believe they can hear others' thoughts, and they talk about it freely, as if it's normal. So in that respect, it's showing a realistic portrayal of someone suffering a crisis. It's very frustrating to deal with as a police officer, because whilst it often results in criminal behaviour, it's a medical issue first and foremost. The girl I found displayed random movements, like spinning and staring at the sun, and made no visible attempt to respond to any requests, which may sound minor, but portrays someone completely lost as opposed to someone fighting to respond. A week later, I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. This is one of my dad's stories. He went to a call where a father had gone crazy and decided to shoot his family. He killed his wife and was looking around trying to find his 5-year-old son to shoot him. The boy ran outside and was trying to hide on the side of the house behind the trash cans. The father eventually found him and point blank emptied nearly a full magazine at the boy. When my dad arrived, they found the boy in shock, hiding right where his dad had found him, but not a wound on his body. There were bullet holes in the side of the house, all around the boy. When they finally got to question him about it, they asked him what happened when his dad found him on the side of the yard. The boy replied, "The angel was in front of me with a shield, and he saved me. He pushed the gun away from me." My partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy, nobody had seen him in a few days. Mail overflowing the mailbox, missed a doctor's appointment, car hasn't moved, etc. We both know we're about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door. Look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner is a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. The door is unlocked, and as soon as we open it, we smell a mostly fresh dead body. Almost relieved, we both enter, and he tells me to check vitals on the dead dude. He is obviously dead, with lividity, dried feces on him, and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are at his house. At this point, we both start screaming cuss words as we both run out of the house. Fortunately for our reputation, our department was not using body cams at the time. Dashcam and mic is pretty funny. We call EMS and they transported him. They said they couldn't get a blood pressure pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get people making fun of me about raising the dead. One day, while filling in for the normal day shift officer in the town I was a reserve police officer in, a very weird set of circumstances led to what was probably my weirdest day ever. When I arrived at the station, there was a new reserve officer standing at the door. I hadn't met him before, but I did know that he had come on board. Since he was new, he wasn't allowed to drive on his own. So he had to ride shotgun during our shift, which actually came in very convenient. At some point early in the shift, this was on a weekend, I received an emergency radio call for officer needs assistance for an officer in a town about 18 miles from where our town was, but I was the nearest backup available. The officer was at a motel and was in a physical altercation with a drunk and disorderly guy and was starting to fatigue. The trip across the 4-lane US highway connecting our towns takes 20 minutes at normal highway speed. I made it in just over 10 minutes, with the rookie white-knuckling it all the way there. When we arrived, the officer had the subject on the ground at gunpoint. So I approached and handcuffed the guy in full felony approach mode. I stood him up and walked him over to the officer's patrol car. As we got to the car, I held him by the handcuffs against the back door of the Crown Victoria and started a pat-down. As I finished, I was getting ready to pull him off the car so I could open the door and put him in. He reaches back with his hands and tried grabbing me by the groin. Remember, I still have him held by the handcuffs, so I placed my right hand between his shoulders and pushed him back against the patrol car, telling him quite loudly to stop what he was doing. It turns out, he never heard me. It seems Mr. Tough Guy had a glass chin. That little shove I made caused his chin to hit the top of the patrol car, putting a dent in the metal, and knocked the guy out cold. Now, just to be sure no one mistakes anything, the shove I gave was actually pretty gentle. He was so drunk, his own inability to control his movements are what caused him to smack his chin on the top of the car. None of us even knew there was a dent until after the ambulance arrived. Mr. Tough Guy was still out like a light. This is where having a rookie came in very handy. We handcuffed the guy by both wrists to the cot, and the rookie got his first ride in the back of an ambulance. Fun fact, in this state, officers are allowed to use a level of force one step above what they are facing. If they're being yelled at, we can go hands-on. If they resist, we can escalate the level of force we use. Since the suspect was attempting to aggressively assault me, I would have been well within my rights to absolutely pancake him to the ground. Instead, I did the ethical thing, since my use of force ended the threat. At this point, it was really grey as to who should be transporting the suspect anywhere. But I had a rookie to pick up at a hospital, so I made my way. I knew the hospital very well. I could blindly walk the corridors, and as long as no one or thing got in my way, could navigate wherever you wanted to go. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours walking those halls as a kid. When we moved here, we lived about half a mile away, and I got to know one of the guys who worked at the public service desk, and almost every one of the PD officers who worked off duty as security. I even got to know the president of the hospital, which pretty much meant I had free run of the joint, day or night, and boy did I take advantage of it. Anywho, I parked the car and went in. What met me was just as curious as anything else that day. There were 2 PD officers, 2 security officers, the director of the health system's security department, an off-duty deputy sheriff, and my rookie, all standing outside of a hospital room, where a lot of screaming and hollering was coming from. The director of security looks at me and says, Are you ready to take him back into custody? I was like, he was knocked out cold for like 30 minutes. Don't you need to at least do some x-rays or something? DOS says, nah, he's ready for discharge. They just wanted to get rid of him due to the noise he was making. But my inner EMT just said, this isn't right. I asked for the patient's chart. DOS told me the patient had been discharged. I responded with, I didn't ask about his status as a patient in this facility. I asked for his chart. One of the guys kind of gave me a dirty look. So I said, hey, if you want him, you can have him. That ended the look. But DOS stuck with the, he's been discharged, he's your problem. Fun fact, at one point in the late 80s, the pediatric and neonatal care units at the hospital had moved to a new facility. One late night, I believe after midnight, one of the officers working security and I were walking the walks and headed towards where the new medical museum was being built, right where pediatric ICU used to be located. As we entered the junction, we could hear an audible beeping sound coming from a place no such noise should be coming from. The old, long since abandoned neonatal intensive care unit. It was one of the patient oxygen alarms going off. I've been to some really intense crime and medical scenes, but this was just crazy creepy. I could feel all the hairs on my neck stand on end. Even the officer was shaken by it. He unplugged the device and radioed the communications operators, who also answered all inbound calls from the public, and paged all the doctors or other staff over the PA system for both of the facilities to report the incident to the day shift. Then we hightail it from the area. It's now used as a family care center, like walk-in clinic, similar to urgent care, but wasn't classified as one, so it was less expensive. At this point, I told DOS that I was the officer who caused the suspect/patient to become unconscious. I explained that I was also a licensed EMT, and until I read the doctor's entries on the patient's condition indicating that he was safe to transport to jail, we were going nowhere. A few seconds later, I had the chart. I did a quick read of the discharge notes and asked, has his urine or blood sample been taken? DOS says we don't need to do one. I pointed at the doctor's written notes and read them. Specimen of patient's urine and blood to be obtained prior to discharge. So I asked again, has his urine or blood been taken? This was important because the guy was drunk and the doctor wanted to see what his BAC was prior to discharging him, since he had suffered a syncopal episode. This was a CYA move on the part of the doctor, since DOS was insisting that we get the guy out of the facility the entire time we're having this conversation. I stood my ground and told DOS the patient wasn't going anywhere until blood or urine sample could be taken and tested to determine the patient's BAC level. DOS was pissed, so I totally disregarded him at that point, instead speaking directly to the officers there. The patient said he wasn't letting anyone poke him with, quote, no goddamn needle, so give me a cup and I'll pee. I need to take a leak anyway. Up until this point, the patient was in 4-point restraint, meaning his hands and feet were all strapped down for safety. When we told him okay, he kept looking at us, wondering if we were going to leave the room. I made it very clear we were not completely releasing his restraints in light of the amount of disruption he was causing. It slowly dawned on him what this meant. We weren't going to afford him any privacy to urinate. I told him he had a choice. He could pee in a cup of his own volition, have his blood drawn by a member of nursing staff, or we'd get a urine sample by having him catheterized. Oh boy, he was having none of that. In the end, he submitted to peeing in a cup, with 5 officers watching him. I told him very clearly what was going to happen to him if he opted to toss any of the urine at one of the officers in the room, pretty much meaning he'd be taking another ambulance ride to the hospital at the other end of town, as the surgical units had also been moved there. He behaved himself and submitted to the test, which showed his BAC as 0.21%. Fun fact, in this state, normally doctors, nurses, paramedics, and law enforcement can submit a patient for a 96-hour psychiatric hold for a diagnosis and treatment of whatever mental illness or imbalance that a patient may have. Even with this civil commitment order, the staff can release the individual to the street if they don't meet the conditions required for admission and medical care. As soon as he was done peeing, hospital staff went about getting him untied and dressed back into street clothes and turned him over to us. He was placed in handcuffs and shackles, and we started to drive away from the hospital. He turned in the seat, having taken off his seatbelt, and started to kick one of the back seat passenger windows. At this point, I pulled over, and I taught the rookie how to apply leg irons and how to hogtie an uncooperative individual. I got the restraints and rope used for hogtying a person in place, and we started back onto the highway. Not long after, I had him fully in handcuffs, shackles, leg irons, and hog ties, and he's still kicking at the door to the patrol car. Finally, I'd had enough. I took the next exit and turned into the first business parking lot available. I contacted the other officer, telling him I was not willing to drive the suspect any further. It took about 45 minutes for the officer to arrive. We exchanged handcuffs, leg irons, and shackles, and tied him up even better, so he could no longer kick at any door. I don't know which one of the two got most pissed and red, the suspect or the director of security. The rest of our shift was pretty much uneventful.